What happens when one of the best pilots in history faces his worst professional moment, and his boss does not defend him openly? Today we talk about the bomb that Frédéric Vasseur released after Hamilton's sinking in Hungary. Is Ferrari losing faith in his great signing? Hungary, a track that has traditionally been favorable for the great talents of Formula One. Technical, demanding, with a complexity of rhythm that allows true champions to highlight when the entire package works perfectly. But this 2025 Hungaroring was the scenario of the most unexpected collapse of the season. Not a team, not of a strategy, but of a legend. Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, an absolute icon of modern motoring, came to this Grand Prix with the urgency of reversing a narrative that began to become uncomfortable. Since his arrival in Ferrari, expectations had only increased. It was not just a change of team. It was the symbolic marriage between the most laureate pilot and the most mythical team. An alliance that promised glory, history, and redemption. But what happened was exactly the opposite. During free training, the data already hinted what would come. A car that did not respond to its style, an inconsistent rhythm and communication with engineers who failed to transform frustration into solutions. However, no one imagined that the classification would be such a painful sentence. Hamilton was eliminated in Q2. Not for climatic errors. Not due to mechanical failures. It was simply not fast enough. Meanwhile, his partner Charles Leclerc in the same SF25 was made with a bright pole position, revealing that the car, at least that weekend, had potential. What followed was a brutal portrait of human vulnerability. Hamilton descended from the car and before the press, let out words that froze the paddock. "I am useless. Absolutely useless. The team has no problems. The car is in pole. They probably need to change pilot." He did not say it sarcastic or as a commentary of momentary frustration. He said it with disarming sincerity. The image of a champion questioning his own place in the sport that saw him become a legend. These statements are not common. Not at this level. Not in pilots of his caliber. In F1, where the narrative always seeks to maintain control, where the speeches are measured to the millimeter, these words were an emotional implosion. They reflected something deeper than a bad classification. They talked about an internal rupture, a pilot who feels lost in his surroundings, unable to understand why the car does not behave as he should. Incapacitated even to recognize yourself in your own driving. And it didn't stay there. During the subsequent press conference, Hamilton maintained the same dark tone. He spoke of things that are happening in the background that are not good. Of distrust. Of discomfort. He suggested that there are internal dynamics in Ferrari that do not work as expected. He even left open the possibility of not returning after the summer break. "I hope to be back, yes. I hope." A phrase full of ambiguity that opened the door to all kinds of speculation. The context makes this situation even more serious. Ferrari is not in technical crisis. The SF25 has proven to be competitive in the hands of Leclerc. And on other tracks, even Hamilton has shown adaptation flashes. But in Hungary what failed was deeper. It was the pilot-coach-equipo connection. And when that breaks in a structure like Ferrari, the pressure soon explodes. Hungary was not just a bad weekend for Lewis Hamilton. It was the turning point that revealed that something does not fit in its new stage. It was the perfect storm. Overflowing expectations, poor performance, incendiary statements, and a team that, instead of turning off the fire, began to look sideways at the pilot who came to save them. After the very hard statements of Lewis Hamilton in Hungary, the whole paddock held his breath. Not only because of the rawness with which the pilot self-destroyed in public, but because everyone knew that the next important word would not come from it. It would come from the top of the Ferrari wall. Frédéric Vasseur had to talk. And he spoke. The director of the Italian team, a firm but measured tone, appeared before the media without visible alarm signs. When asked about Hamilton's emotional state, his response was disconcertingly cold. "I don't need to motivate him, honestly. He is frustrated but not demotivated. It is a completely different story." Later, he insisted, "He is demanding, but that is why he is 7 times world champion. He is demanding with the team, with the car, with engineers, with mechanics, with me too. But first of all, he is demanding with himself." A phrase that might seem a compliment, but cold analyzed, it is something else. It is a pressure transfer. Vasseur is remembering the world that Hamilton is not a victim of circumstances. That is a leader. And that, as such, it is also required to lead in difficult times. Moreover, when asked if he was disappointed by the results obtained so far, his tone changed. He said that some comments in the media were inappropriate, which was too early to question the investment return of Hamilton's signing. Ferrari is not an institutional crisis, but at a communicational crossroads. Does Hamilton still bet on the figure? Or begins to reorient your narrative towards Leclerc as the main pillar? That is the unanswered question that Maranello is over. In the center of all this emotional and media storm, there is a question that even in Maranello seems to be completely clear. Ferrari is being a victim of a bad decision with the signing of Hamilton, or is simply succumbing to the pressure that they themselves created with this bet? Because when one observes the cold data, the contradiction is evident. Ferrari's car, the SF25, has proven performance. It is not the most dominant. It is not perfect, but it has been competitive in circuits of very different characteristics. In China, Leclerc was among the top 5. In Japan, Hamilton recovered rhythm and fought again in the upper part. But then Hungary arrives, and everything collapses. The same car, 2 pilots, 2 completely opposite realities. One achieves pole. The other does not even enter the Q2. How do you explain that? The answer is uncomfortable, because you can no longer blame the car. It is no longer just about adaptation. The human factor begins despite more than the technical factor. And all this weighs. It weighs in engineers who feel that any technical failure can be interpreted as sabotage to the champion. It weighs in Leclerc, who begins to feel how the international press turns its cameras to the other side of the garage, although he is the one who continues to deliver consistent results. And of course, it weighs in Vasseur himself, which now must not only manage a technical team, but also a much more toxic political and media context. The true dilemma for Ferrari is that they are trapped between 2 opposite narratives. On the one hand, they have their historical pilot, Leclerc, symbol of their resurrection. On the other, to a living legend that came to change everything. But instead of mutually rising, both seem to be colliding in a space that was not designed for 2 egos of that size. And if one of them fails, as happened in Hungary, the entire weight of the narrative falls on Ferrari. So, is Ferrari the victim of signing? Or are you simply being crushed by the pressure they built themselves? The answer is not simple. But if something has become clear, it is not enough to have a good car or a great pilot. Cohesion is needed. A common direction is needed. And that, for now, still does not appear. The summer break in Formula One is not simply a physical break. It is a mental pause. A time where teams are cold every decision, each error, each strategy. But for Ferrari, and particularly for Lewis Hamilton, this break comes with a special weight. Not as an opportunity, but as a limit. As an invisible border between the promise of redemption and the threat of rupture. Because although officially nobody says it, in the environment it feels that this break is not one more. It is a silent ultimatum. There are no communications. There are no formal warnings. But it's there. In the careful words of Frédéric Vasseur. In Hamilton's resigned tone. In the lack of clarity on the next steps of the project. Everything indicates that this break will not only serve to recover energies, but to make decisions. Hard decisions. In sports, Ferrari cannot afford more weekends like Hungary. The calendar after the break includes Zandvoort, Monza, and Singapore. 3 clues that not only require technique and precision, but also have a tremendous symbolic burden. Monza especially is Ferrari's Mecca. It is the temple. The place where everything is magnified. If their Hamilton does not respond, the trial will be immediate. The Italian, passionate and demanding fans like no other, does not forgive low performance when there is such a big name dressed in red. And if the pilot does not react, the team will not be able to continue justifying the status quo. Vasseur has already suggested that he expects an evolution. The team will not undo the Hamilton contract in a precipitous way, but it could begin to adjust roles, strategies, and priorities. An internal restructuring is not disposable. In fact, rumors are already circulating in the paddock on changes in the allocation of resources within the team, even in the dynamics of cargo development. If the car does not adapt to Hamilton and Leclerc can squeeze it, which of the two will have more voice in the technical evolution process? Hamilton himself seems to know. Therefore, his words in Hungary were not just an emotional download. They were a signal. When he said, "I hope to be back after summer," I wasn't talking about the calendar. I was talking about his relationship with the project. Of your connection with the equipment. Of his will to continue under pressure that begins to become unbearable even for someone with 7 world titles. But the most important question, the one that nobody dares to ask out loud, is another. What if Hamilton no longer wants to follow? What if Hungary was the final crack? The British has crossed crisis before. He has had complicated seasons. But this situation is different. It is in a completely new environment. In a car that still does not understand it all. And with a team that does not operate under the structures of Mercedes. There is no Toto Wolff managing every detail with German discipline. There are latent chaos here. Heavy history. Flammable expectations. Is Hamilton ready to rebuild from scratch, once again at 40? Or will this summer serve to rethink his future, not only in Ferrari but in F1? August's silence will be deafening. And meanwhile, Ferrari must also look forward. Because if the situation is not stabilized, the echoes of the pilot market will begin to grow. There are already names on the horizon. Some within the Ferrari system itself. Others observing carefully from the outside. Nobody says it, but everyone thinks. If Hamilton is not the solution, how much more time can it be part of the problem?